Hello, everybody. Please take a seat. We're going to start the session this morning. My name is Yuri Kumsa. On behalf of our board directors at the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, I welcome you all. We're very thankful for you to be here. We're going to hear about a very important topic this morning. And it's going to be the role of Latino business, our business community in modern American infrastructure. And with that, please take a seat. Thank you. With that, I'm going to introduce who is going to be moderating our conversation this morning, Red Battle, who is the principal and owner of Public-Private Strategies. So good morning and welcome to our 2021 United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce Conference. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Yuri. And hello, everyone. It is so great to be here. As Yuri mentioned, my name is Red Battle. I'm the founder and president of Public-Private Strategies and the Public-Private Strategies Institute. And so thrilled to be here with you today for what is a timely and amazingly important conversation as we talk about infrastructure. As you all know, as we've begun to have a conversation coming out of COVID-19, there's been a number of bills that have been passed already at a federal level. And currently in Congress, there are two major pieces of legislation being talked about as well, which are both going to have a significant impact on the business community and the small business community. And I think what we're hoping to do today is a few things. One is kind of set a little bit of context, which I think you all know about the current state of how small business is in the Latino community. A second is talk a little bit about these potential pieces of legislation as well as current legislation and what that might mean. And three, have a conversation that's a little forward-looking. I have an amazing set of panelists with me today. I'm going to quickly introduce them. And then also very exciting, we're going to be joined on screen by someone who a few of you probably know or have heard from or joined the conversation, Zack Butterworth, who's the Director of Private Sector Engagement at the White House. So just introducing this amazing panel, you all already know Mr. Yuri Carranza and his amazing leadership at the Chamber. Sitting next to him is Zio, who's the Vice President of Engagement at Small Business Majority and an amazing public policy advocate. And to my left is Tammy Halevi, who leads the Reimagine Main Street initiative. And is that better? Okay, I'll just stay back like this. So what we wanted to do was to go ahead and kick today's conversation off. I wanted to start with you, Tammy, and I was gonna ask you to maybe paint a little bit of a picture for us. Tell us who Reimagine Main Street is. I know that the USHCC is heavily involved, but I also know that Reimagine Main Street is doing a ton of research, including looking specifically at Latino and Hispanic small businesses. And so if you could sort of set some of the broad context. And then Zio, I'd like next to come to you to get a little bit of an update about where things are at a federal level. So Tammy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Red, and thanks to the USHCC for having this conversation today and for an amazing conference filled with fantastic people and lots of ideas. I co-lead, as Rhett said, Reimagine Main Street, which is an initiative focused on ensuring equitable recovery for Latino and other small businesses from the COVID pandemic. We work to both shape private market activities as well as government action, and we do that in three ways. We have a national network of stakeholders that represent cross-industry and cross-sector interest and activity. We meet regularly to problem solve and engage. The second thing we do, as Rhett mentioned, is generate data-driven insights, largely from the perspectives of small business owners. We do this in partnership with the USHCC and a number of other organizations. We have led national surveys of thousands of business owners to understand how COVID has impacted them, as well as expectations for the future and aspirations for policy and other market changes. The third thing we do is engage in dialogue, both small group dialogues to bring stakeholders to policymakers, but also to have conversations about important issues for Latino and other businesses across the country.
It doesn't sound as bad here.
I hear quite an echo. So as Rhett said, and you all know, we're here to talk about the impact of modernizing infrastructure on Latino businesses. As Rhett said, I'm going to spend a few minutes setting the context for Latino small businesses in the wake of COVID and how the proposed infrastructure investments could be transformative. The story of the pandemic, as you well know, is one of extraordinary shocks to Latino businesses, as well as, at the same time, optimism, growth, and extraordinary resilience. Which story you tell depends to a great deal on when you start that story and, frankly, where that story will end. So if we start the story in April of 2020, a month after the shelter-in-place rules started, the story is one of devastation and real extraordinary shock. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 32% of Latino businesses were closed in April of 2020 relative to the number that were open in February of that year. It's roughly a 30%, 1 in 3 businesses during that period shut down. When we did a survey later in 2020 with USHCC and other organizations of about 8,500 small business owners, including almost 1,000 Latino business owners, not surprisingly, what we found was Latino business owners were devastated. 86% of the respondents told us that their businesses were hit extraordinarily hard by the pandemic. Extraordinarily hard by pandemic, with 47% of them telling us that they were hit extremely hard, and that's 10 percentage points almost higher than their white peers. The consequences were quite serious. At the same time, just over a third of businesses told us that they lost more than 25% of their annual revenue, and that starts at more than 25% and goes up to complete elimination of revenues. And almost half, 49% of business owners told us that they had to lay off their, some or all of their workers. If we roll the clock forward to a year later, in May of 2021, we see extraordinarily high levels of optimism, particularly among young, if you define young as less than 50, Latino business owners. But very low levels of optimism among Latinas of the same age. Among all of the cohorts across race, ethnicity, and age, Latino business owners under the age of 50 were the most optimistic that they were seeing recovery and were optimistic about where the future was going. On the other hand, Latinas were among the least optimistic. We think that the reason for that giant gap is that the Latino women have more of the caregiving responsibilities, particularly childcare. Now, what happens with the infrastructure package and the investments in infrastructure will undoubtedly have a huge impact on what the next chapter in the story is. As you know, elements of the proposed infrastructure investments include traditional infrastructure like bridges and roads, but also includes broadband investments, transit investments, and soft infrastructure investment in things like childcare and caregiving. When we surveyed business owners about their policy priorities, Latino business owners told us 3 things were the most important to them. The first was lowering healthcare costs, but the second and the third were infrastructure investment and simplifying federal contracting. The 2 of those tie together like bookends, because if you think about the consequences of this next chapter on Latino businesses, there are 2 ways that there can be great impact. The first is the consequences of the investment and how bridges, roads, infrastructure, broadband can help business owners and their customers. The second are opportunities from contracting from the infrastructure investments. What we hope to see is, if the package passes and the contracting opportunities are made available, the opportunities and the future could be quite bright.
Awesome. Super helpful to have some context and some data to set the story, as well as a little bit of an overview of what's in the package. And I think What's interesting is it gets a little jumbled in Washington. We sort of have these two big bills. We have the infrastructure package, which I think is something a lot of us are familiar with, roads and bridges. And then we have another package that's really focused on care infrastructure, which are things like paid leave and child care, which I think we're seeing in the data is playing out and having an effect on small business and ownership. So Zio, I wanted to turn to you before I come to Yuri, because Yuri, we hear a lot in Washington. I want to hear what you're thinking on the ground. But Zio, I mean, what's the current state of sort of these two pieces of legislation? I think just broadly, some would say we did a lot under the Trump administration. There was the PPP. Biden came into office. We had the American Rescue Plan. We're talking about another set of two major investments. So we'd love to hear, what are your thoughts on these two, huge potential priorities that are coming down the pike that seem like they're coming to vote maybe as early as this week? And, what exactly does it mean for small business? And what's your general thoughts on the state of play?
Wonderful. Thank you, Rhett. And wonderful to be on a panel with such an esteemed set of panelists here. My name is Xiomara Peña. As mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Engagement at Small Business Majority, and we are a national small business advocacy organization. We've been doing small business outreach, education, and research work to mobilize small business owners and to also educate our policymakers on the state of small business on various policy issues for the last 15 years. By show of hands, can I know where the small business owners are in the room? Okay, we've got a few. And then chamber leaders, and if you're a chamber leader, that's a small business owner, you can keep your hand up as well. Okay, that's really helpful because I think that later on, I know we're gonna talk about some call to actions because the state of the packages right now as they stand, I think that you're hearing the news. We're not in a good place, but what I want to start off with is saying that investments in both the physical and the human infrastructure pieces are critical, and especially as we think about the Latino community, when we think about who's building the roads and the bridges, who's going to be benefiting the most from broadband access that's affordable and accessible. We saw the challenges that small business owners faced in various rural communities. We know that 36% of the Latino community lives in one of those southern states, if you may, that doesn't have access to broadband widely. And so even at the height of the pandemic, when we asked business owners to pivot and to leverage online models to be able to stay afloat and grow their businesses, that the infrastructure that we needed was frankly just failing. It's crumbling. And so these investments do pose a significant opportunity as already referenced. Currently on the timing, let me get here because we did have an update. There was a vote that was taken yesterday and it did not go anywhere, but I think that was also important to see where the votes landed in terms of who is in favor of passing both of the packages as they stand. Currently, the reconciliation package, which is the package that includes the care pieces around increasing paid family leave access, around the child care investments, those have been sent, all 13 committees have approved the pieces of legislation for reconciliation and sent it to the House Budget Committee. And on Saturday, the 25th, the House Budget Committee advanced the legislation. The bill language has passed by the committees, and it's expected to be pre-conferenced within the Senate committee version of the bills. We believe that both Pelosi and Schumer, their top aides, along with committee chairs and White House officials, are continuing to look for a framework that offers more buy-in from some of the progressives in the party. We also recognize that the bipartisan infrastructure vote in the House since reconciliation likely won't be done in time. The goal is to try to get this passed. We've heard a lot of shifting timelines here, but I think that there will be another vote Thursday this week to see where that lands. And again, it only takes 2 to 3 votes to not get us over this critical opportunity where we can ensure that these investments are done so in a way that speeds up recovery for those businesses hit the hardest by the pandemic. And I just want to close before we turn it over to Yuri with saying that post-2008, we never fully saw small businesses recover. Most small businesses still had access to credit challenges, still had challenges in obtaining federal contracting opportunities. They might have seen their credit impacted, their homes foreclosed. And so right now, we are coming off of a global pandemic, and it is a unique opportunity to ensure that we get this right, that we are placing our dollars where they go to have the greatest impact for a way that we are able to recover in an equitable fashion. I think Arturo said something yesterday that stuck with me. We're not asking for extra, right? It's just to get to a fair place. And so I think that, again, for our policymakers, telling the story, leveraging the data to be able to indicate the support, the wide support from the Latino community on the packages as they stand right now, even with the pay-fors, which I know we'll get a chance to talk about in a little bit, but there is wide support for both pieces of the legislation.
Super helpful, Zio. And actually, I was going to come to you next. I want to talk about, because we're talking a lot about infrastructure and investments, we have to talk about how to pay for it. So that's going to be important. But you raised a point that I'm going to come back to Tammy on after Yuri, which is around sort of the connection between small businesses and their workers. Because I think one of the big pieces here in the reshaping that we're seeing is a real stronger focus on workers and how do we lift up living wages. And I know, Tammy, you've been doing some research about that and trying to understand that. So Yuri, over to you. I mean, we kind of got this like big overview. What does this actually mean on the ground for a chamber like yours, for businesses like yours?
Yeah, and to explain also, I guess why I'm sitting here is that as I introduce myself, I'm Yuri Kunsa. I serve on the board of directors of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, but I represent one of 6 chambers that are part of our board of directors. I represent Nashville because I am the CEO at the Nashville Area Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So this is the longest running or oldest Hispanic chamber in Tennessee, but we are I would say, a small organization that cares about small businesses primarily, and we have been able to learn a lot through this COVID year, almost probably more than a year and a half, and how the circumstances impacting our businesses also led us to learn more about other things that small businesses are facing and challenges that are making it very difficult for them to survive these days. And we're also part of one of 8 cities in the country that get the support from the USHCC through a program called USHCC Cares. And with that, we explore and found ways in providing technical assistance to those small businesses impacted by COVID, so they can have a chance to access the funding available through the SBA, PPP loans, EIDL loans, and all of that. And we found that, yeah, it's true. It's hard, even with something that was designed to help small businesses. It was a challenge to getting the funding from the lending institutions, the financial institutions. And so that this infrastructure bill, the impact to Tennessee is that we're going to get about $8 billion, most of it for hard infrastructure that is going to go to highway costs. And what I understand is it's only going to be 20% more to what the regular funding, usual funding it is. And I think our Tennessee legislature is set to approve things that go only to those a few things that they're already familiar with doing. And they are not exactly very encouraging of, let's say, use some of that for electric vehicle charging stations, which could revolutionize everything that we have really in our market, with our Hispanic population amounting to about almost 500,000, which signifies 7%, about 7%. I'm just giving the broad numbers here, rounded numbers for population numbers. Our population in Tennessee is 7 million, 500,000 being Hispanic. That's 7% of Tennessee population, with an understanding that about 400,000 people don't have access to internet. So that broadband infrastructure support, I think it's allocated about $100 million to that in the state of Tennessee, can actually help. We have found that through the COVID year, Latino businesses learn how to do business using the internet, and that gives us an opportunity not to shut down. So I'm concerned if all of this may be political bipartisan or not, or lack of it, can interfere with actually something that through the years can bring an impact to those that need it most. And also the water infrastructure portion of it, which can impact the schools and replace things that needed to be replaced at homes, that lead pipes and all of that, that can impact the education, indirectly the health of the students that attend public education. So just one more piece of information for you all to understand how our market is and the size of our market is, that we have, Census 2010 put Hispanics at around 10% of the population in Nashville. Now that number is a little bit more than 14. So we have about 100,000 Hispanics in Nashville, which is one of the, I think, considered to be a hot and top destination. So there is a huge disparity if you think about the state of our Latino community, which constitutes, I think, in the whole country about 5 million essential workers. And because of the circumstances in which our community, unfortunately, because that's an immigration situation that that's another, for another round table, but we are the backbone of the economic prosperity of our country. And I know you know that already, because if you're a Latino, you're involved with what happens to us. You understand that we've been here doing the hard work, but when there are times of need, or times of critical times or crisis, really we do not exist, and we need to change that. Yeah.
Super helpful to have the local perspective. Tammy, I wanted to come back to, I think we heard both Zio and Yuri talk about issues around equity, and I think it's hard to have a conversation without equity without talking about workers. I think we're all familiar with the Paycheck Protection Program. One of the things that was fascinating about that was it was not only access to capital for business owners, but it was a way to keep workers on payroll. And I think, it says a lot about the current state of Washington, that infrastructure, which has traditionally been something that's very bipartisan, that we're having a hard time sort of getting this figured out. Not that this is sort of a perfect package, but I mean, how do you see, what are the numbers telling us in the survey research you're doing about sort of the financial health of workers? Do we know what is the connection between small business owners and workers? And are policymakers thinking about that at all as they're sort of preparing this package?
It's a great question, and it's super, super important. I think the short answer is I don't think that policymakers think enough about the distinctive nature of workers in small businesses compared to large corporates. It is very, very different. 56 million people work for small employers with fewer than 20 employees. And the vast majority of small businesses, which you probably know, have fewer than 100 employees. We're talking 90%. So there's a huge number of people whose livelihoods and family and community depend on their employer as a small business. What we know is that in terms of job quality, on a bunch of dimensions, workers in very small employers, fewer than 20, are much more satisfied than workers in large organizations. On most of the soft dimensions, do I like my colleagues? Do I feel I have a sense of purpose? Am I engaged? Small employers are off the charts. On the dimensions around pay, actually, in the aggregate, workers in small employers are generally as satisfied as their peers in large organizations. The place where there's a very big gap, and that gap links to the infrastructure investment, is around benefits. Paid leave, health care, childcare, the whole range of non-monetary financial supports to be able to be sustained and sustainable are small employees in small businesses are at a disadvantage. One of the things that we saw in the pandemic was a very interesting alignment between, and it's not surprising, but a very interesting alignment between business owners and their workers. The PPP did a lot to help retain employees in small employers. Unfortunately, the smallest businesses were far less likely to apply and far less likely to get that funding. And it was particularly acute, that differential in access to the PPP was particularly acute for Latino businesses.
Super helpful.
Could I add something?
Yeah,
Okay.
please. I was coming to you next.
I'm
My big
sorry.
no, and so maybe give you the question. Say what you want to say, but also my question is, it seems like there's broad agreement that some form of this infrastructure package is needed. I think the big question is how we pay for it.
Yeah.
And what does that mean for small businesses? Because I think there's a lot of misinformation exactly about what tax revenue looks like.
Yeah.
And then Yuri, I do want to come back to you about this point about the PPP and what it looks like on the ground in the USHCC CARES program. So Zios, over to you.
So I just want to reiterate, I think when we look at small businesses, one, folks start businesses because it is a proven pathway to economic mobility. Some of us, even with educational attainment, are not able to have wage parity or to accumulate wealth. And so business ownership is that viable pathway to that economic prosperity and mobility for many of our communities of color. And in particular, in our Latino spirit, I think that that's something that runs just naturally in our blood. The other thing that Small Business Majority believes about small businesses is that they are, as Tammy referenced, they are pathways to good, high-quality paying jobs. Sadly, oftentimes, you're not going to be able to compete, however, with a Facebook or a Netflix for those levels of benefits. We'd love to potentially be able to provide our employees with a year off for maternity leave. But realistically, how many small businesses can do that out of pocket? They don't. They don't have the ability to do so. And so, and again, we are in a prosperous country without a federal paid leave program. That is unacceptable. When we think about the workers, mainly women, yes, men can take paternity leave, and we think that that's important too. But mainly women that have to wait until their children are elementary age school in order to re-enter the workforce. And again, we're talking about lost time that is not recovered, that has also significant impacts for women workers over the course of their period. And for those of you that are mothers, I think that we've all had those questions on our resume around gaps. The care economy is another part of this piece of the puzzle around we're an aging society right now in the US. We're going to have a huge gap, and especially in the Latino community, there's several of us that play multiple roles. I can think of one business owner in Orange County, also with the Orange Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Maybe she's tuning in, but she's running 2 successful restaurants with her husband and also caretaking, and that in some ways is work that is incredibly important for our families. And so paid leave is critical. Childcare access is another component of that, where we have a lot of immigrants, a lot of people of color that own childcare businesses. And so ensuring that there is an equitable way to pay for that kind of investment in our children and families is also really important. So business owners do need a baseline, and there is wide support. When we've surveyed small businesses on this, we found that a majority of small business owners support a federally mandated or a federal program around paid leave, because they wouldn't have to design it. And we've seen models where it's worked. California has a robust paid leave program 20 years of lessons learned there to take away from. And so, and other states are also adding on to that prospect. So this all sounds good. I see a lot of heads nodding, but I think you guys might not be nodding right now. No, I'm kidding. No, I think the question, and this is always the challenging piece, right? How do we pay for this? What are we doing? And who is going to be impacted? Because that's a real valid concern. And we definitely recognize that we operate in a realistic and in a way that our economy is the first and foremost important thing. And so the largest revenue raisers for both packages really come from a tax provision, which would raise taxes on individuals, large corporations, and tobacco and nicotine. Now, the revenue-raising provisions would raise about $2.1 trillion over 10 years. And this is according to the Congress's official revenue estimator, the Joint Committee on Taxation. We'd raise the corporate tax rate for income about $5 million from 21% to 26.5%. So that's for folks that are earning more than $5 million. We'd raise corporations earning more than $5 million. We'd raise the top individual income tax rate from 37 to 39.6%. And again, top income tax rates. We'd raise the top capital gains rate from 20 to 25% and impose a 3% surtax on individuals with incomes of about $5 million. It also indicates that these pay-fors would also include about $80 million for the IRS for additional tax enforcement, because that's a big component, and we've heard a lot, and I think there's concerns even right now with the paid leave credit around access issues. And so, but for businesses and for individuals that are earning less than that, and again, I think that this is one of the pieces where we think about the corporations paying their fair share of taxes as well. That is something that I just want you all to consider and take away from this.
Cool. And Zio, I'm going to come back to you a little bit because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation around small business and tax issues. I know you're not an accountant. We probably have some with us, but I just want to break that down. But Yuri, I think, we talk about these big packages and then they come down and the implementation is really tough. So I'm thinking about the employer retention tax credit, which is a tax credit that actually works for a lot of businesses, but the take-up is actually not very high. It's a really cool tax credit. It was in the American Rescue Plan. Another great example is the tax credit that was in the Affordable Care Act, which was passed under the Obamacare law. We just didn't see a lot of small businesses take it up, even though there was a ton of education and outreach. SBM has been a pioneer in educating people about it. And so I think the question is, we're going to pass all these programs, and I think you've had the experience of being on the ground, particularly with the PPP and the USHCC CARES program, and I'm just wondering, are there lessons learned from that you think could be applicable? What did you all learn through the USHCC CARES program on the ground about educating business owners sort of in this moment? And then Tammy, I'm actually going to ask you the same thing from sort of a macro level. What did we learn from PPP in this process that might be informative as we sort of move forward with these infrastructure conversations? So Yuri, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, it was a learning experience for all of us, I think, where we were, because I'm glad that there was something like that, but then they keep, adjusting it to make sure that it works, and it took time to catch up with all of that. But a reality that perhaps some of you chamber leaders or business owners from different parts of the country that are attending today this session can relate to, perhaps, is that, I'm in Nashville, so this is not Texas or California or Florida, where the Hispanic population, I think, has a lot more roots and a lot more influence. And it's hard because it is difficult to believe in our market the story we tell here through these conferences, the story we know in other parts of the country of the success, determination, just the strength of our Hispanic business community. So people get turned down. And no matter how you try and how you put it, it's challenging and frustrating. Well, this is, I hope you can grasp from my comments that it hasn't been as is it probably has been in other parts of the country, and we're trying, but we had some success with that, which is really small compared to the success we know in other areas of the country, just because of those connections. So we need more of the leadership, Latino leadership in markets like Tennessee, to make it happen, to convince, or no, for it to be clear that there is potential there, and you know, this, of course, a loan and all of that is a risk that the financial institution will take, but I think it's going to be well rewarded. And just to add to it, just in context for a very small market like ours, where, you know, some of our small businesses, and you see one of them yesterday during one of the sessions, or launch session, there's Delicias Colombianas, there's a food truck. It got some of the PPP funding, but it was small. It was amounts under $20,000. You know, a couple times. You know, it's we help a little, but you know, we could aspire to better. So my experience in the U.S. coming at 21 years old and being super excited about getting my first credit card after, I guess, the branch manager liked me somehow and gave me one with a $500 credit limit. And I was excited about that because it was difficult. And I imagined that to a small business. Our community is often portrayed as a community in need, and it may be in need of many things, but it's not in need of just charity. I think we're in need of an opportunity and in need of appreciation, not only cultural, political, but also as in our capacity as business owners, which are part of the huge fabric of America that makes us so strong.
Awesome. So Tim, I'm going to come to you next. I think I'm going to do questions a little bit early. So I'm going to turn around, and then Sir will come to you in the back. So Santiago, if you want to get the questions set up, and we'll take some questions before the White House joins us, and we'll have some questions from them too. So Tammy, lessons learned from a macro perspective, and then Zio, I'm going to come back and nail you on these revenue raisers.
So I think we learned a lot from the PPP, both in terms of what worked well and, unfortunately, what worked less well. I would call out probably three things in particular. The first is just a baseline around the design of policies that affect small businesses. I think we don't have an appreciation for what small businesses really are in terms of relatively capacity constrained. Those of you in the audience who are the CEO of your business know that that actually is probably chief everything officer. The second piece is language and accessibility from a communication and way to create awareness and understanding in language that is familiar. And the third is both around awareness and accessibility. What I would characterize as trusted guidance are the channels through which people can access both information about a program like the PPP and support in completing the application. Are they sources that are natural places for business owners to go and to trust? We've seen lots of examples like the chambers, like a Small Business Majority and other organizations providing education to business owners and then support in getting access to the resources. And I think that's probably, for me, among the most important takeaways of the PPP. You can design a perfect program, but if it doesn't land in a way that people know about it and can take advantage of it, it's only a perfect program in Washington.
Cool. Susie, I'm going to ask you to do two things for us before we go to questions from the audience, so get ready if you have any questions. One is just to build on this idea of, like, if we build these federal programs, will they actually help, whether it's the PPP or any of them, because I know you have a lot of experience just being on the ground talking to business owners about them. And then the second is, I feel like every time I open up the paper, I read about, we raise taxes on corporations, it's going to kill small businesses, and these are the small businesses that are going to be hurt by them. And I think as we're considering these revenue raisers, I'm just wondering whether, is there facts in that? What does that mean? And, you know, could you break that down a little bit?
Sure. So to add on what Yuri was mentioning, and Tammy as well, And my work, although I'm the Vice President of Engagement at Small Business Majority and hold a national role now for the last year, a bulk of my work has been focused on working with business owners directly. And I'm the daughter of two immigrants that also leverage their entrepreneurial skill set in order to be able to provide financially for our family. And so I'll just say access is critical. Many business owners didn't take advantage and are still not taking advantage of the employee retention credit because they don't have access to a bookkeeper. They don't have an accountant on payroll. And so even that kind of infrastructure that the business needs in order to sustain itself and grow, not just sustain itself, but we'd like to have our businesses grow, right? So to be able to grow, there are, I think, models that have been tested at different accelerators and incubators around could we provide that back office support so that the business owner could do what they do really well, make their products, sell their products, provide that service, and don't have to worry about the marketing and being the chief of everything, because oftentimes you're doing that. And that's a big challenge for folks in terms of taking advantage of the tax credits and taking advantage of, and these rules are complex. I mean, 20-page, 30-page guides written by the IRS is not a fun read. I'm gonna tell you that myself. So when we think about, that's one component, but then there's also a very real understanding that bias and access has not always been the forefront. And I'm really excited about the administration's diverse leadership and folks like Administrator Guzman that I know is thinking very intentionally about how to enhance voices from leaders that are on the ground to be able to provide feedback to the SBA. Is this working? Is it not? Is it shifting? My colleague here, Latavia, our Southern California Outreach Manager, she tested out some one-on-one appointments and just tested it out and see how it worked, and it worked really well for connecting business owners to a grant program in the state of California. And we gave that feedback back to the SBA, and we said, you should try this with the COVID EIDL revamp, and they had four sessions last week and got 1,200 people on them. We need to be able to have those feedback loops with these different federal agencies so that they can not just build the programs, because sometimes their expertise is very strong there, but a feedback loop needs to be created from the people and the community-based organizations and the stakeholders that are also supporting small business owners that recognize their unique needs in order to ensure that we can, even if it's not built 100% well the first time, that there's area and room for correction. That's the critical piece that I think when we think about the design of some of these programs that needs to go in and be very intentional about creating that space. The second piece, I think, I'm not an accountant, so I'm not gonna pretend to be one. But when we think about the corporations and then the pay-fors, I think we will see some companies transition their structure, their legal structure. I know that there are some ways in which LLCs versus S corps versus C corps may be taxed under these current tax provisions, and so that might be a conversation with each individual business owner to have with a set accountant or a bookkeeper to support them through this process, which I think is a very, very good investment to have in your business. And I think that much of the concern, the one piece that I've heard a lot of concern around is this pass-through piece. There is a requirement or a piece in the regulation or in the pay-fors that say that they would limit 20% deduction for pass-through business income. And pass-throughs are businesses whose profits are reported on the personal tax return of the owner and not subject to the corporate income tax. So proponents of the pass-through deduction describe it as helping small businesses, but most of the benefits actually go to the richest 1%. I'm gonna repeat that again. Where was I? Proponents of the pass-through deduction may describe it as helping small businesses, Again, the pass-throughs, again, are just mainly leveraged by that wealthiest 1%. And the ways and means provisions would not phase the deduction out even for high-income people, but instead it would limit the total amount of the deduction for up to $500,000 for married couples and $400,000 for unmarried couples. And so even if you are operating your business leveraging pass-through income, if on paper you're earning less than that, you won't be impacted by these changes in the tax code. So that's important to recognize, is to take a look at the books and see how you're structured, because pass-through income, again, is reported on your personal. If you're an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp, you might have a different way to report that as well.
You said cuppies. I thought you were going to say puppies, and I was going to say, let's not tax the puppies.
I might be thinking of puppy.
We all love the puppies. Washington should leave them alone. And I say that as a DC insider. Okay, sir in the back, if you'll tell us your name and the name of your organization, and then other folks, just let me know if you have a question as well. We'll come to you next, sir.
Sure. Alfonso Barrera from Hispanic Professional Network, and I'm also a volunteer for SCORE, so in the third largest market in the United States.
Nice.
So who can you name that's Latino who is a representative that's tied to this infrastructure bill, so that we can hold these people accountable when these things don't work out, like the PPP loans didn't? Because, and then another thing is, when you say that it's not going to impact people that are not making $700,000 or whatever, but I know a lot of Latinos that make that much money because of their businesses, and it's not a lot of money because they're leveraging here and they're leveraging there, and they're still not coming out ahead, and they are going to pay for it. You say that they're not, but they will, because their cost of paying for goods and everything is going to go up, because that gets passed down to small business owners, and they're the ones that are affected the most. Corporations can spread that out, but small businesses can't. So, it would be great to know that there are Latinos who are helping in making sure that Latinos will be protected. And if they don't protect us, then we should not vote these people, not vote for them again, and not make them career politicians, because those things that happen in Washington, it has to stop. I mean, these conversations happen it's been happening for at least 25 years that I've been in business.
Yeah.
And, it's always been the same.
Yeah.
And Latinos always get the short end of the stick, no matter how sophisticated supposedly we get.
Yep.
No one looks out for us, but Kanye West can get a $10 million PPP loan.
I think there's a lot of folks who share your sentiment.
Soho House got $25 million.
Yep.
And it's kind of we never get the opportunities that I think that are available there for us, and also to show that if we are given the opportunity, that we can make great things happen.
Yep. So I think this whole panel agrees with you on the equity piece. I think I'm going to ask the panelists to stay focused on policy, not politics, because we're here to talk about policy, and I just don't want to enter a huge conversation about politics, because we probably have an array of opinions in the room. But Yuri, I would love to hear your thoughts on this advocacy piece, which he brings up, which is important about holding our leaders accountable, and maybe what is the role local chambers like yours can play working with USHCC around the advocacy piece. And then Zio, I don't know if you want to respond to some of the overall conversation around just sort of the economic pieces of the tax infrastructure. I think those were the two main parts of your question. So Yuri, I don't know if you have thoughts on the advocacy side, and Zio, do you want to pass your mic, or I can pass mine?
My mic is over there. Hello. Okay, good. So we have to keep doing what we do, and keep unifying efforts, I think, and just making sure that the message is clear, and then take these good initiatives that are coming and bringing that to the attention at our local market. I think that representation part is the role we play as Hispanic chambers, associations, other economic development agencies. So do your part, please. Join us, team up, bring the message where it needs to go, and be super confident, be proud of what you all do, because it's so vital, so important. I think we're moving a little forward, getting things to improve. it's not all negative. We're making connections because we know we have, I think, a rediscovering our sense of purpose as organizations that had to do our part. So we all have a job to do, and I think that's what it is. So it's encouraging. I think we want to bring that spirit of encouragement through this conference and to the conversation, and know that eventually, no matter what you do, it adds up little by little, eventually moving you forward.
Well, I saw in my bag, there's an actionable thing that you can do, and that's, I guess, attend the legislative luncheon that USHCC is hosting in March. I don't remember the date, but it was in the pamphlets in your bags. But that's important because those spaces are spaces where you're going with a national chamber, the largest U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, to advocate, to connect with policymakers, to learn about the policy discussions that are happening, and to inform policymakers. You're right, there is a big disconnect oftentimes, and a lot of the work that I've done sometimes includes, and in our organization, it was very frustrating to meet with policymakers who believed that business owners were millionaires and wealthy, and the average, self-employed income is something like $56,000. We're not talking about, millions here. And I think also Arturo with the Stanford Latino Business Associate Network, LBAN, he also mentioned, we have a scaling issue for getting those business owners over that $1 million mark, right? So first, next step, I guess, register for the legislative luncheon in March that the U.S. Hispanic Chamber is hosting. And I also think that there's work to be done around narrative building. Our stories, whether it's you're the chamber or you're a business owner, we have to do more in centering those voices and stories. Our organization, Small Business Majority, does some of that work as well. Chambers do it, small business development centers do it. There's a whole host of providers and networks that also help to build this piece because, again, narrative building, storytelling is so influential, and small business owners are trusted messengers, our top trusted messengers, even ahead of government and other institutions. And so you have a lot of power in your voice. Don't diminish that or dismiss it, and I hope that you recognize that is a big piece. And so, and then around the pay-fors, again, I'd be happy to give you my email so that you can follow up with additional questions, and my colleague here also will have cards available.
Thank you for your question. Hi, Cindy.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Nice to see you all. Tammy, nice to see you. Yuri, nice to see you. I just want to say thank you.
You could be up here as a chamber leader
so funny.
on advocacy.
I just wanted to say thank you all for doing what you do, especially during COVID. We learned a lot and worked together on the Zoom, as we said, doing all kinds of things. But I think my most critical question as a chamber leader, I'm, as you all know, CEO of El Paso Hispanic Chamber. We've been blessed to have MBDA and Women's Business Center CARES programs, which we continue to do right now. The bigger challenge that we have with our minority businesses are specifically those in rural areas who did not have access to technology, and those women and heads of households were having to go to McDonald's where their kids were doing their work and they were trying to build their business. From a leader's perspective on the ground, what do you need us to do to be a bigger voice? We're not as loud as we need to be, like other minorities in this country. We need to work together and be one huge, loud voice to get all these policy things through. Many of our small minority businesses, especially in our market, are still extremely fragile. They're still trying to figure out how to open that revenue spigot. They're still trying to figure out how to navigate all the rules and regulations. What would you suggest as those that are in DC that we need to do on the ground floor to help you be that bigger voice to get these things taken care of?
Sounds good. Tammy, I thought maybe I'll start with you. You could talk about maybe the power of data and kind of how you've seen data influence policy, and then maybe Zio, if you want to talk a little bit about the organizing side, and you're, of course, can add in. But
Cindy, it's terrific to see you not in the Zoom. It's terrific to see everyone not in the Zoom after 2 years of the Zoom. I think there's two parts. Part of it builds on what Zio was just saying around engaging and showing up. It is both delivering the story and the message, but also signaling that you're watching and it matters. I think the data tells a very important story, and what we've been finding is that by aggregating data nationally and disaggregating it into what does it mean for Latino businesses, what does it mean for Black-owned businesses, what does it mean for AAPI businesses, what does it mean for all businesses, so that we can tell a story that regardless of where you are, regardless of who your constituents are, these very small businesses are crucial to the economy, they matter, and they're suffering. And oh, by the way, when we look at the data in that aggregated way and disaggregate it, we can tell the story of all small businesses need resources. Here are the places and the ways where Latino businesses need extra support or different support or resources that others don't need. So that's one piece of it. I think the other piece, quite honestly, and perhaps somewhat where I stand is where I sit, I think that engagement that local organizations have with national organizations and groups in DC, whether it's Reimagine Main Street or Small Business Majority or whomever, to make sure that the messages that are circulating in Washington are actually messages that reflect the reality in places. Because it is way too easy for a sort of echo chamber and tunnel in DC to aggregate, synthesize, and miss the point. And the point is what lands in place and what enables you and others like you to do the work for the businesses who are in your community, whether they're in the center of El Paso or in sort of a rural extension.
So, and I just got a message. I think the White House is going to join us in about 3 minutes. So we'll have Zack up on the screen. So Zia, I'll go to you, and I'll try not to be rude and cut you off.
You can cut me out. Yes, I'll echo that. And I think as a local chamber, you're on the ground supporting your members, right? Whether that's through ecosystem building, I think having the chamber have good relationships with the local SBA office, several SBDC or technical assistance provider organizations, and several CDFIs. I think you're able to really provide a good, robust set of support services for small businesses. On the opposite end, on the organizing front, there are several national organizations. We're not a membership-driven organization. We don't charge member dues. And so for us, and I think Reimagine Main Street, the same goes, we are providing resources for for your organizations to be able to uplift your voice as well, because we really believe in the power of collaboration, and those partnerships are critical to be able to get that work done. As one entity alone, we're not going to be able to do that. Collectively, our power has a multiplier effect there.
Cool. So thank you, and thank you, Cindy. So I think we're all set up. I'm getting the nod. And so Zack, I don't know if you can hear us, but Zack, this is Rhett sitting in Las Vegas. There's someone on the screen, but it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to a friend and colleague, Zack Butterworth, who leads private sector engagement at the White House. Zack, I thought what we might do is maybe just have you kick off with some remarks, and then we took some questions earlier, so would love to hear from you. Over to you, sir.
Hey, Rhett. I just want to make sure you all can hear me.
We can hear you.
A little low on my end.
We can, and we see that White House chair behind you. Yeah.
Apologies for that. I'm sure I have all my stuff up. Yeah. All right. Well, look, if I sound good, then I appreciate it. But Rhett, thanks to you and the entire team there for inviting me. And I am feeling a little left out that I'm not with y'all in Vegas. But I know you were celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month in style. We're doing it up here in the White House this month, and proud to kick off Hispanic Heritage Month with all 4 of our Latino cabinet members at an event this week, and then we even had a mariachi band in the White House today. I'm a little upset I wasn't invited, but I'll pick that up with my colleagues. But speaking of my colleagues, I also want to express my appreciation for my friend Ernie Apreza, who handles our Latino engagement. Ernie's one of the MVPs on our team, and I'm honestly always impressed with his advocacy, with his tenacity around the White House. I'm a little mad at him that I didn't get invited to the party today, but I'll take that up with him. But for those that haven't met me, I'm Zack Butterworth. I am the White House Director of Private Sector Engagement here in the Office of Public Engagement in the White House. So I am sort of the liaison to the business community, large and small, and so we're proud to be speaking before you today and proud to work with you all. And would also like to thank the 4.7 million Hispanic-owned businesses that combined you all generate about $800 billion in economic activity. It's very impressive. So when President Biden took office, it was very clear that we had to confront an immediate economic crisis. We were in the midst of the most significant recession since the Depression. And we also knew we had to make some long-term investments in American families. So the first thing we did was write and pass the American Rescue Plan. People thought that maybe it was too big or too small, but certainly there's plenty of criticism out there. But we sure are glad that we have it now. It included direct payments and historic relief for individuals, for families, for small businesses. And we know that it's working. We know that we've added 4.5 million jobs since we came into office. Economic growth we're seeing is the fastest in 40 years, and the unemployment rate is thankfully coming down. But right now, our economic growth is leading the world's advanced economies, but we know we have to do some more. And the president has a plan that's going to lower out-of-pocket costs for families and make some long overdue investments in infrastructure of the nation. So right now, there's a bipartisan infrastructure deal pending that many of you have heard about. It's got broad bipartisan support. It's going to fix roads, bridges, highways, take the lead pipes out and replace those with safer pipes, expand broadband coverage, help with clean energy and environmental cleanup, and make us better protected from severe weather. So these are all things that everyone agrees on, and hopefully we'll get that done across the finish line soon. But before we go into Q&A, I want to talk a little bit about our Build Back Better agenda, and that's also the other sort of legislative package that's pending right now in Congress. And so with that, we're focused on creating jobs, cutting taxes, and lowering costs for working families. This is all paid for by making the tax code fairer. We know that Americans, on reducing the cost of prescription drugs, we know that Americans pay 2 to 3 times more than their partners in wealthier countries. Now, this means that this contributes to the fact that Latino individuals use 10 to 40% fewer medications than their white counterparts for the same illness. So we know we have to get drug prices down. We also have to reduce costs for parents. About 40% of Hispanic 3 and 4-year-olds are not in a preschool or in a kindergarten. Now, the president's plan lowers the cost of child care and will make universal preschool a reality. Our plan is also going to create 12 weeks of paid leave. And from a business perspective, while I'm excited about improving maternal health and bonding with children, I also think it's great that small businesses will be able to offer a benefit that maybe their larger counterparts are able to offer now and they're not. We also are going to reduce healthcare costs. We know that there's 10 million Hispanic people that were uninsured in 2019 when President Biden took office, and that's unacceptable. So we're lowering healthcare costs through the ACA. We're also focused on housing costs and in general lowering taxes for families. So together, these plans are going to help folks in your area. They're going to help small business owners, teachers, firefighters, sort of the working families of America. They're going to cut their taxes. We're going to lower prices for everyday things. And while we're doing that, we're going to build new infrastructure and deliver on our pledge of clean drinking water and high-speed internet and other infrastructure improvements. So we're very close to these major investments. We're very excited about them, and we're confident that we're going to advance these this week. And just want to say a big thank you to the entire Latino community, and I appreciate all the partnership and help as we've been through these last 9 months. So with that, Red, I'll turn it back over to you.
Cool. Zach, we sourced a few questions before because we knew you were joining us electronically. This is really weird and interesting. So first, we talked a little bit earlier about the infrastructure package. I want to talk about that. But first, I just wanted to ask about last night's vote on the debt limit and what potentially last night's vote means. What does this mean for small businesses? Is the government going to get open? Are we going to get the debt limit raised? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so unfortunately what we're seeing is sort of the latest politicization of an area that maybe hadn't been politicized publicized before. But right now, the Democrats have proposed and passed through the House a package that includes, it's going to keep the government funded. It's going to provide for some disaster aid for the last 2 years, including Hurricane Ida, which slammed into my home state, Louisiana. And then it would also raise the debt ceiling, something that has always been done. It's been done 80 times, and folks generally agree that if we weren't going to raise the debt ceiling, we're going to see pretty calamitous results. And I don't know if anybody's checked sort of the cover of the Wall Street Journal, but the Dow's down about 500 points after last night's vote. And so I think we're very concerned about what this can mean for small businesses. Now, there's going to be, or will likely be, a lot of market uncertainty heading up to the sort of, we call it the X date. But what it means for small businesses as we get closer is that it's going to increase the cost of borrowing. It's going to impact health insurance, any sort of credit exchange, like credit cards or anything that can increase the cost there. So a lot of scary items that we try not to be sort of the folks that are focused on that. We're focused on trying to get it done and get it done quickly. But appreciate the small business community support in getting this done, and hopefully we'll have more to come on that.
Got it. I got two more for you before we'll let you go. We talked earlier about workers, and I think we are hearing from small businesses about the shortage of workers. Some of that is being tied to issues around affordable housing, and I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on that issue, and in particular how that might link to the conversations around the infrastructure package.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we know a couple things. One, 55% of Latino renters pay over 30% of their income in rent, right? So their rent burden. Now, our plans and investments are going to help lower those costs. They're going to increase the supply of affordable housing through tax credits and government financing. We're also going to help construct or rehab at least 1 million sustainable housing rental units, and then hopefully construct another 500 million more units. We also have a plan that helps sort of increase the zoning density, and I know this is a wonky topic, but it allows that we're going to have more folks inside of cities, and that's where people want to work and they want to live, and so we have to make sure that housing there is affordable. So we have a plan to do this, and we're very excited about it, and would love to work with the chamber here to make sure it's a reality. That's in our Build Back Better approach.
So I think that leads to the last question before we let you go. We were having a conversation about what business owners can be doing, and I think all of us are wondering, what could we be doing to help life get back to what we knew as normal? What steps can be taken? I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts we have, an audience of small business owners, chamber leaders, how they should be thinking about this and what they can do.
Yeah, well, look, that's a good question. So look, we know that for small businesses, especially ones that rely on the hospitality industry, tourism industry, restaurants, that they've really been suffering the last nearly 2 years. And so while Congress has provided some relief, it's certainly not been enough, and we know folks are still hurting badly. But the number one thing people can do is help to increase the number of people getting vaccinated. Now, I'm sure almost everybody with you is probably vaccinated, but we're focused on really getting that number above 90% for everyone. You saw the president has taken some action around federal contractors. That's going to be rolling out here in the next few weeks. We've also have a new OSHA rule that will be coming out that would apply to businesses with 100 employees and more. But would encourage everyone to use this opportunity to really educate their employees and help spread the word about vaccines, and would love to work with you all for those that are really want to talk about that and want to work with us. Red knows how to get us, and would love to highlight people that are doing the most there.
Awesome. Well, Zach, on behalf of the USHCC, I just want to say thank you for making the time. Hopefully next year you'll be with us in person, somewhere wonderful and warm, and we can all be together. But thanks for carving out the time. We really appreciate it. So I think we have about 10 more minutes. I don't want to stop questions if there are questions. Zach did raise vaccines at the end, and so I might ask Tammy to talk a little bit about the work she's doing on vaccines. But are there other questions? Sir, we'll go to you. If you could give us your name and the name of your organization.
Good morning. My name is Willie Rodriguez. I'm actually here from the Arlington, Texas on my own. I don't belong to any particular Hispanic organization. However, I do want to say something. I just retired from the SBA 3 years ago. In 2018, I was a lender relations specialist. The reason I say that is SBA has a bunch of great programs, and I'm still a big advocate for SBA. However, with that said, when they rolled out the PPP loan and the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loan, the economic injury disaster loan was a simple process. It was so easy. You go in there, put your information, it came out. If they needed more information from you, they will send it. Within days, you will approve. Now, that was a loan program. You have to repay that. However, with the PPP loan, in my opinion, that was somewhat a disaster in a way that the lenders handled it. Each lender had their own criteria, their own way of doing things, and they really didn't do a good job at promoting it to small business or even their own clients, small business client. I have a company, a financial service company. I service businesses with employees of less than 20. I had to make an effort to teach them about the loan and actually help them through the whole process. My question is actually I have two questions, is it possible to make that, specifically with the PPP loan, something in the future, if it ever comes back, or something similar, that every bank has to use the same process, the same way of submitting the loans? Second, since we had lots of business that were eligible for those loans and didn't take advantage of it because of the whatever barriers they had, is it possible, or do you foresee that coming back again? The PPP loan coming back, and have specific ways of it being uniform. And I apologize, I just want to make a comment about this. I have one bank, which I will not mention, that pretty much was almost like an act of Congress to get them through. Another one was simple. So I believe it should be a uniform way of applying for those loans.
Yeah, it's super interesting. We'll come to you next, ma'am. First of all, thank you for your service and what you've done for small businesses. We are fortunate because Tammy has dedicated her career to figuring out access to capital issues. And I think that's why I asked the question earlier, because the PPP was a massive transfer of money and wealth in our country in a way that we've never seen before. And so we really do, like you're saying, we need to learn the lessons from it and how it can be applied forward. So, Tammy, I don't know if you want to start, and then I'll invite you all as well to chime.
So I think your question is an important one. I personally don't think that in our lifetimes we'll see another program of the magnitude of the PPP. Let's hope that we don't need another program of that magnitude. I think there are two things that went into the hodgepodge or different standards. The first was, I think we have to recognize and acknowledge that the program rolled out very, very quickly. And as a consequence of that, a lot of, to Zia's point a moment ago, roll something out, try it and refine it. The roll something out part happened, the try it and refine it, slightly less so. The third round opened up a lot more lenders into the pipeline, community lenders, minority development banks, all kinds of more grassroots and community-oriented organizations. I think the tension between a standardized process and let each organization kind of define within parameters is a hard one, because if the SBA dictated too much, you would have lenders not participating. We saw that a lot. If you have too much flexibility and not enough front doors for a business owner, which is what we saw in rounds 1, certainly, and part of round 2, you have limited access. There is proposed legislation before the House and Senate right now that may be part of the reconciliation that would create a great deal of flexibility for the SBA to enter into direct lending. Part of the design of that proposal is a response to what the SBA and Congress believes are lessons learned from the PPP. Devil's always in the details, but there are some strong indications that some of the things you're describing have been noted and folks are hopeful that they will be addressed even in the absence of a program of the magnitude of the PPP, lending programs as usual within the SBA.
Cool. Zio, do you want to hop in there at all?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think the first round of the Paycheck Protection Program launched in April. Global pandemic, and shutdown orders happened around mid-March of 2020. So this happened fast. It did happen very fast. The first round, I agree with you 100%. The data shows it. There were huge disparities as to who benefited in those first couple of rounds. The SBA did leverage mainly their SBA Community Advantage and 7A traditional bank partners. And again, our folks in underserved communities, are they connected to traditional lenders? You know, we have to work on that, and we're continuing to improve there. But nonetheless, I think it did leave out folks. I think another thing that we saw, there was the way that lenders were reimbursed for the underwriting. I think in the rules, it was intended that that you would encourage or incentivize these lenders to be able to underwrite smaller dollar PPP loans. But again, if you're getting 1% on an origination fee or a lender fee off of $1 million loan versus 3.5% off of $10,000 loans, where are you going to invest your time? You're going to call up your book of business, and we saw that played a huge factor in access for many smaller businesses. The folks that were able to access money during those first couple of rounds were business owners that had strong relationships with community banks or credit unions, also part of that network, of the SBA's network, that had those relationships. But outside of that, you know, again, you're right, each lender had a different, some of them were collecting online applications, some of them were doing a combination of paper and online. We did see some improvements in the later rounds, as Tammy referenced, and those numbers did get a little bit better. I think there were also concerns we've heard from business owners that applied for the economic injury disaster loan in March or April, and then PPP came out, and then the flexibility for the forgiveness rules were more clear or even more flexible in the second draw PPP loan. You didn't know that you would potentially qualify to get a second draw PPP loan. So there were a lot of changes, and I think, again, I hope we don't find ourselves in a position where we are looking to need this influx of capital. However, we are still currently dealing with COVID right now. And if anything, it exposed the systemic barriers that have existed in those institutions as a whole. And so with the SBA right now, they're about to launch a council for underserved communities. They had an application for that, and I know that will be a great space for leaders to be able to contribute feedback to the SBA around these programs. We heard Mark Madrid yesterday talk about, you know, the COVID idle, and I think there are going to be a lot of lessons learned out of that product, and how how utility or usage right now is working with some of the changes that they've done around removing the personal guarantee and things like that. So yes, it was challenging. Absolutely, there were disparities for women, African American, and Latino small business owners, even self-employed folks, again, until like early this year, I would say. Those rules were not clear. And so there are a lot of lessons to learn, and I think that there are some great papers out there. The NCRC did a paper around some racial bias testing with the PPP loans, and that was a fascinating research. Happy to share that with you as well. We've also done some surveying, and I think and the SBA has also put out a lot of data that is available for us to look at in terms of how that money was distributed.
And take one. I'm just going to take one more because we're running out of time, and then I'll come back to you for the follow-up because it's an important topic. Ma'am. Yeah, let's take the question, then maybe we'll bring it out. I just want to be mindful of time. I'm trying to get everyone's
Hi,
thoughts.
good morning. My name is Anna Dewan. I'm from Kansas City. I'm a small business owner, and I know the SBA did a wonderful job with the PPP, with the EIDL, with all those grants and loans that they were able to give to small businesses. But how about the businesses that don't have a social security number or a tax ID number, but they do have an ITIN number? And I do radio, and I would say a lot of the businesses that I do business with were hurt by that because they were not able to apply for any of those loans. However, they are tax-paying people. They do taxes every single year. They pay taxes sometimes more than the average American, every single year. So is that something that will change in the future? Because like you said, COVID is still here. And it's not going to go away tomorrow or by the end of the year. It's not going to be our next Christmas present that it's gone. And still, businesses are still struggling, and we see that every single day. So is that something that will change in the future, that business owners that have an ITIN number will be able to apply, and they will pay the money back if they need to?
Yeah.
So is that something in the works?
Helpful. So, Yura, I'm going to start with you on just the broad concept so that you get a moment, because I didn't mean to cut you off. And then I don't know if anyone can speak to I-10. I can provide a little bit, but Yuri?
Well, yeah, that's a segment that I guess is not considered, is not counted on. And I don't have an answer for that. I'd like to believe that there is something coming, but it's tough because it will be rules that are deeper and more complex that had to do with basically getting that money repaid. Even though we know that those that work at the ground, that yes, that's a community that you can trust, and you know they are going to fulfill their commitments. But there's a whole other list of things that they are not going to be like, for instance, for just to get a loan to buy a home. In our market, we have companies that will lend at 8% or something, which is I'll consider such too much. Imagine for a loan that is for SBA loan. So another thing also wanted to bring up is that even though the EIDL is a loan, and there are terms and there is a percentage also of interest in there, and the SBA is totally supportive, at least in our state. We have a great relationship with our regional director. It's up to the lending institution to go through it and also find, I won't say that they are not considering a priority, but then we have instances in which the bank will say, well, we don't have any more loans, or the applicants don't get a callback or things like that, because they say, well, we're too busy. We were just processing all of these applications, and then we end up being sort of, at the bottom of the pyramid of being considered for those resources. And this is a reality in a market like ours.
I don't want to misspeak, but I believe, and I'll get your card after, but the I-10 was originally not able to be utilized, but when the Biden administration took over, I believe they opened a 14-day window for small businesses, and one of the changes they made was actually, if you have an I-10, you were able to take advantage of the PPP.
And I will add, it was unclear. It was very unclear whether individual taxpayer identification numbers were a replacement for a social security number. So when the Biden administration, so you were able to apply. The Restaurant Revitalization Fund made it very front and center. They were very clear with their messaging that I-10 holders were eligible. The Biden administration changes and that 14-day window made it, reinstated that I-10 holders could apply. But I also think, again, going back to, there's a trust factor here. Let's be honest. If you're an I-10 holder and you're going to an entity that is a government institution, how comfortable are some of our constituents, our compadres and comadres, how comfortable are they also accessing that capital out of fear, potentially, that they will be in some way that data will be shared in the future. And I think that that's a very valid and real concern. And so the folks that maybe were ITIN holders, I think when they had a corporation or an S corp or another legal structure for their business, were more likely to apply for the product itself. But I think about, our sole props and self-employed folks. I think there are some concerns there. And the rules were frankly not clear in the beginning. Whether that was an accessible program, it was very vague.
So sir, I promise to come back to you, and there's a young lady. We really only have a few minutes, so I'm gonna ask each of you 30 seconds, and then I'll ask the panelists to respond, but then also wrap up so that we get everyone. I will say though, it is a remarkable change in administration, and that's not a political comment, but it was very intentional that I-10 was not part of the process in the previous administration, and it was something that the Biden administration did make a commitment to early on. I agree with you. I don't think the messaging was clear, but it was a big change in the beginning. Sir, we'll go to you, and then ma'am, we'll take your comment, and then I'm gonna ask you all to respond and kind of do your wrap up. And I always loved it in a panel with like a call to action or like what's one thing people should know. So sir.
Yeah, I think he said his question was already covered, so if that's okay, we can go one last question, right?
Yeah. Give us your comment, and then we'll take one last question. Quick.
Have you considered for those businesses that did not apply for the PPP for up to a certain amount for up to a certain amount, let's say 100,000, 150,000, to be forgivable, just like the PPP?
Yeah.
Have
Okay,
you-
hold on. Take that, and then let's get his question, and we're just going to do a rapid round.
My last thing is that I did about 41 loans for people with ITINs.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not being rude. I just want to get to everyone. I want to make sure everyone gets a voice, and I know there's probably more out there as well. So.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. Ernesto Hidalgo, Renaissance Downtowns USA. We do social impact real estate development. We're working on a project in the city of San Bernardino, just a couple of hours drive from here. 65% of the population is Latino Hispanic, 20% is Black. It's also one of the poorest communities in the country, and happens to be an ideal place to build high-density housing. The White House Speaker, Zack, mentioned that this is part of the infrastructure bill. There's going to be substantial investment to the production of new housing and increasing high-density zoning. That, coupled with everything else that we're talking about here, is really an incredible model to create transformative change, to bring about equity. Does anyone on the panel have a little more information to share about this bill that can be inclusive of everyone as these transformative communities occur?
I can definitely get you more details on the bill if that's helpful, so we should just connect after more specifically. But Yuri, I'm going to start with you, let you wrap up if you have anything, if there's anything you want to leave people with. Zio, maybe you can take the question on IDLE, and then Tammy will end with you. So.
Yeah, what you said, Zio, I think the importance of realizing that there is a situation with trust here. And if the government has an option for a small business, no matter if it's a ITIN holder or not, it's just hard to believe even that something will happen when historically small businesses have been turned down from access to capital. And so for all you, sort of homework and for all of us, is that I think we need to strengthen the relationships we have with those in financial institutions, and also those that are perhaps even have a conversation with them and see, okay, how this works for all of us. And if we have a closer relationship with them, if something comes up, I think things may go in a better way or smoother than they went. It was just every week or every couple of days learning that there was a new thing and inquiring, and all the time that took to get back for them to get back to us and then figure out, or reading so many different media reports telling one thing or another, getting us excited. And we, as Hispanic Chamber leaders that are working with the community, with the business community, also if something doesn't go well, somehow it kind of comes back to us, and we just need to have those answers ready and the relationships ready if something like this comes around again.
Our organization has submitted recommendations to the SBA that includes an automatic forgiveness for IDLE under $150,000. We believe it's important. Again, I mentioned there are business owners that applied for it immediately when we went into a shutdown mode, and they didn't qualify for big PPP that was ultimately forgiven. And I think that we're seeing some concerns. I don't know that we're there where we're seeing concerns on repayment right now, but it is a pressing issue that I think we should address. And there is dollars that were still set aside that were unspent that could be also leveraged in order to do at least some of that, if not, at least for the smallest of idle products. We don't have it's a recommendation, but there's outside of that not much else that I can share there. If I could close with something that you guys could walk away with, I would say, small businesses are the backbone of our economy. We know that beyond just being a fact, I think that we need to hold policymakers accountable to ensuring that they're building equitable solutions for small businesses. And that as advocates, we're also presenting pragmatic policy recommendations that are grounded in your small business's actual needs, leveraging the data that we're collecting to be able to tell the story and advocate. And so if you could take one action, I would invite you to join our network. We have a network for partners. We have a network for business owners. Our programming is free. We have research that we host and we share. And I recently read this article called The Crucibles of Leadership. It was in a Harvard Business Review. And it talked about crucibles being these moments in our lives that really shape us. And oftentimes they're unprecedented, but when we lean into them, we start understanding even much more. It invigorates us much even more. And I think if anything, the pandemic, hopefully, for those businesses that have survived or that have pivoted, will be one of those crucibles in our lifetimes. It'll be an opportunity where we can stop, reflect, and take from this experience, because this has been a hell of a year and a half. It has been challenging for a lot of people. And so I think, let's not gloss over this huge opportunity that we have to really build in this equity with this investment. This is a massive investment that would completely reshape, and completely define our investment in people, in care economy, and all these things. So I just want to share that because I love that article. It was really short, and I think you guys should read it too.
No one loves the Harvard Business Review. Wow, you're I say with the love, you're a dork. Okay, Tammy.
Super quickly, first on the ITINs, it's not a great answer, but many of the community lenders, whether we're talking CDFIs or CDCs, originate loans using ITINs. In Kansas City, there are two in particular that I'm fairly certain do. One is AltCap and the other is Justine Peterson. But in communities across the country, most of the CDFIs do lend to ITINs, and it's super important. I think I'll end where I started, which is the potential from the infrastructure investments for Latino businesses is massive and transformational if it happens. I would encourage everyone in this room to, as we've talked about, use your voice locally, connect more broadly nationally, make sure that folks know you're watching and that you have very specific, as Zia said, needs and expectations. I too invite you to join a network, lots of networks to join. The Reimagine Main Street network, many of you are already a part of. We work with USHCC and many of the chambers. I invite you to join that mailing list, engage with the group, or simply check out the website, reimaginemainstreet.org. Thank you so much for being here. This was a terrific one.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you guys for staying 5 extra minutes with us. We'll see you soon.